Hello everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Beginning Bugs. This week I'm going to be going over each of the HQ choices in detail, so you can pick out which models you would like to have leading your army. HQ choices are mandatory in every detachment type you can take, so picking the right HQ is necessary to building an army that works together on the battlefield. I will be going through each HQ choice in the order they appear in the Tyranid codex, followed by any Forge World options you can take. So getting started, the first HQ presented in the Codex Tyranids is the Broodlord. The Broodlord is iconic for being a gene stealer who has grown to tremendous size, towering over even the superhuman Astartes. Clocking in at 125 points, the Broodlord is a beast in close combat and also works as a support character for units of gene stealers. Its Brood Telepathy special rule gives all Genestealer units of the same Hive fleet within 6 inches of it, +1 to hit on the fight phase. This brings Genestealers up to hitting on 2s, which makes them even nastier in combat than they already are. The Broodlord is a Synapse creature, and thus also has the Shadow and the Warp ability. Synapse is essential for all your HQ slots, as keeping your army fearless is the strongest aspect of playing Tyranids. All of the Tyranid HQs have Synapse, and thus Shadow and the Warp, so I'm not going to mention that anymore. The only exception is Old One-Eye. Back to the Broodlord lacks durability, having only 6 wounds and a 4+ armor save. He does have a 5+ invuln, but it's really having the character keyword that's going to keep him alive. You hide him with other large units or behind other monsters to prevent your opponents from shooting at him, and then you send him out to kill a key unit in your opponent's army. The Broodlord is one of our strongest melee options for his points. He has 6 attacks that all hit on 2s, strength 5 re-rolling wounds with his monstrous rending claws. All of these attacks are at AP -3 for D3 damage. Or if you spike a 6+ to wound, it is an absurd AP -6 and flat 3 damage. An attack profile like that means you can easily kill a 5-man squad that's sitting on an objective, or you can even take on 8-wound vehicles like Dreadnoughts. Rerolling wounds while only wounding on a 5+ makes you actually average 2 6s for flat 6 damage. So you only need 1 more wound to go through and roll a 3+ on your Broodlord's damage, and he is single-handedly taking down a much larger vehicle than himself. The downside is, once he's punching something, which is where he needs to be to do damage, he's often in the front lines and will quickly be destroyed by a counterattack. So alternatively, he is a Psyker, so you could hold him back in your artillery lines and just have him throw out spells, and have him only attack when the enemy comes too close. This does keep him alive for most of the game, but means he will not do much against another gunline army. I personally like to use him as this latter option and give him the Resonance Barb relic, so he can cast 2 powers at +1 to cast, and this makes him a great counterpunch to anything that deep strikes or moves too close to your back artillery gunline. Moving on, the second HQ choice you can choose is the iconic Hive Tyrant. At only 155 points base, they seem like a steal, but they very quickly become expensive once you give them war gear. However, Hive Tyrants are the iconic leaders of the Tyranids. They are massive monsters towering over the battlefield. They are toughness 7 with 12 wounds and a 3+ armor save and a 4+ invulnerable save. They are one of our most durable HQs in terms of pure stats, but can also be killed instantly by rolling a few bad invuln saves against anti-tank weaponry. Still, they are built to lead the swarm and thus have an 18-inch range to their synapse instead of the regular 12. This nearly covers half the table if they're standing in the middle of it. They have a base movement of 9 inches, making them fairly speedy on the tabletop, but they can get to truly insane speeds by giving them wings. On top of this giving them the ability to deep strike from reserves, this bumps their movement up to a staggering 16 inches. Sadly, wings are rather expensive at 45 points, instantly bumping the Tyrant up to 200 points base before he even has any weapons. But they can very much be worth it in certain cases, as they also give him the fly keyword. The Hive Tyrant is one of the few monsters that has several choices for loadout, and can be equipped with 2 sets of guns, one of which can even be a heavy venom cannon or a Stranglethorn cannon. Alternatively, you can make your Hive Tyrant effective at both melee and combat by giving them a single set of guns and then a monstrous close combat weapon of your choice. Or you can try and keep the cost down on the Hive Tyrant and keep it as pure melee. Staying with just 2 sets of Scything Talons will give you an extra attack. And that extra attack really does come in handy, as the biggest downside of the Tyrant's melee is that it only has 4 attacks. This, combined with its strength of 6, means it sadly doesn't threaten tanks like you really think it should. And only having 4 attacks means even if every attack gets through, it can't kill a full 5-man unit. And it often only kills 2 or 3 models, which is pretty unfortunate for a model that costs over 200 points. However, this is the most versatile choice in the entire Tyranid range. It can cast 2 psychic powers a turn, it can shoot and perform well in melee. Combined with a large movement value, the Hive Tyrant is just a solid participant in every phase of the game. He is a true jack of all trades and master of none. The next entry in the Tyranid Codex for HQs is the one and only Swarmlord. The Swarmlord is a unique character, meaning you can only take one of them in your army, but he is known as the biggest and baddest dude in our entire codex. In the lore, he single-handedly beat the tar out of Marnius Calgar, Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, and Dante, Chapter Master of the Blood Angels. Sadly, in the lore, such unique and powerful characters can't actually die, so they were both saved at the last minute. But it's as close to victory as Tyranids have had in the storylines. In terms of leading your army, the Swarmlord is treated as a unique Hive Tyrant. Thus, he has the same toughness 7 with 12 wounds, 3+ armor save, and 4+ invuln save. What makes him better is his invuln goes up to a 3+ in combat. He also has an insane strength 8 with 6 attacks, which makes him actually able to take on very large and durable models. I personally have had him take out 2 Imperial Knights and win against both of them. Now, that was a very edge case. I got really lucky, and you have to use stratagems to reroll wounds and fight twice with him. But Swarmlord definitely feels as strong as he looks, and he really can go toe-to-toe in combat with just about anything in the game. Sadly, if it's not in combat, he has the same durability as a regular Hive Tyrant, and again, a few bad invuln saves against las cannons or meltas sees him dying in a single turn. So you really want to try and keep him out of line of sight until something valuable comes into his threat range. Speaking of which, that brings us to our next point that makes the Swarmlord worth every bit of his 270 points. The Swarmlord has the Hive Commander ability, allowing you to pick a friendly Hive Fleet unit within 6 inches. Instead of shooting, that unit can move again as if it were movement phase, and it can still charge that turn. This means Swarmlord can double move any of your melee threats, whether that's Gene Stealers, another Hive Tyrant, or even himself. You double your threat range for your melee monsters, which is a massive boon to your army. Especially because this is done at any time in the shooting phase, so you could wait for all your guns to clear out your opponent's screen, and then move your melee threat into your opponent's backfield to hit the more juicy targets. I normally hide Swarmlord out of line of sight and have him throw forward other units for the first 2 turns in the game, and then have him double move himself turn 3 to go smack something and get his points back. Though expensive, I do think Swarmlord is worth having in just about every list, and the model looks amazing. I actually have a Swarmlord model here, just to get a good idea. Such a cool model. All right. After Swarmlord, our next entry is the Tyranid Prime. Though very weak compared to the rest of the HQ choices, the Tyranid Prime is the cheapest HQ option we have. Starting at 75 points before War Gear, the Tyranid Prime is toughness 5 with 6 wounds and a 3+ save. Sadly, he has no invuln, and his durability comes from being a character and hiding behind other units. Preferably warrior units, which he is designed to buff. His ability is actually quite useful as he gives all warriors and prime units from the same Hive Fleet within 6 inches, +1 to all their hit rolls. This includes melee and ranged weapons, so if you're planning on taking even a single unit of 6 or more warriors, I would consider taking a prime in your list. He makes the warriors ballistic skill 3+ and weapon skill 2+, which can really make those warriors hit above their points level. He is a synapse creature, but he is not a psyker. He has 4 attacks that hit on 2s, but are only strength 5. I tend to run him about as cheap as possible, maybe spending 3 points to give him Bone Swords, giving him an extra attack in AP 2. But he's really not there to do damage on his own. You only take a Prime to buff up your warriors. Following the Prime is the Turvagon. The Turvagon is a massive monster who has the incredible ability to spawn new units of Gaunts directly onto the battlefield. This giant mama is the biggest at toughness 8 with 14 wounds. Though unfortunately she only has a 3+ save and no invuln. Though an incredibly cool model and really thematic for how Tyranids can fight on the battlefield, the Turvagon is sadly past her prime. She can only cast 1 power per turn and gives Termagants within 6 inches reroll 1s to hit in the shooting phase. Unfortunately, Termagant shooting is not strong enough for that to really ever play a huge role in your games, and it's just kind of a small added bonus. But her main ability, and what makes her cost her unbelievably expensive 220 points, is that she can spawn units of Termagants. At the start of your movement phase, you can pick a unit of Gaunts and replace up to 10 models that were slain earlier in the battle, as long as those models were equipped with Flesh Borers. Alternatively, if you have reinforcement points, you can spend them to create a new unit of 10 Gaunts equipped with Flesh Borers. They have to be placed wholly within 6 inches of the Turvagon. Sadly, this is just not worth it, as you either have massive units of 30 Gaunts who have had at least 10 Gaunts die, but not the whole unit die, in order for you to replace them, or you have to spend reinforcement points to create a new unit. At which point, you could have just spent those points and had that unit to begin the game with, instead of risking the Turvagon dying and you just sitting there with reinforcement points that now cannot be used. The other big downside of the Turvagon is Synaptic Backlash. If the Turvagon dies, every Termagant unit within 6 inches of the Turvagon take D6 mortal wounds. All in all, this model's just way too expensive for what it does. Even though it looks really cool and I love the concept of it, it just doesn't do anything else other than give you more Gaunts. It only has 3 attacks that hit on 4s, and for 220 points, you can just take 44 more Gaunts, which is way more than the Turvagon would ever replenish in a 5-turn game. Moving on, after the Turvagon, we have the Neurothrope. A upgraded Sergeant version of the Zoanthrope, the Neurothrope is here really for only one thing: to cast spells and to live long enough to keep on doing that. It is a Synapse creature and one of the cheapest we have aside from the Prime. The Neurothrope is 95 points and can cast 2 spells a turn, but only knows 1 plus Smite. However, it is really good at casting those spells, as it has a unique ability that allows itself and all Zoanthrope units within 6 inches of it to reroll 1s on their psychic tests. Another fun ability it has is Spirit Leech, meaning as long as it kills a model with its Smite power, it can restore a lost wound to itself or a Zoanthrope unit within 6 inches. This is a minor buff, but can actually make a difference since it's difficult to get wounds through these models' 3+ invulnerable save. At toughness 4 and only 5 wounds, the Neurothrope is completely reliant on character protection and its invuln save as a last resort. But you kind of want to keep it next to your bigger stuff anyways, as it only has 1 attack that hits on a 4 and no guns. He's literally doing nothing but casting spells the entire game. Use this as a cheap way to fill your HQ slot and get your psychic buffs up. Specifically, the Neurothrope is best used as Chronos and a reliable way to get Symbiostorm on your shooting units. The Neurothrope is another solid choice to give the Resonance Barb Relic to, although it laughably cannot use the 3rd cast that the relic gives it, as it only knows 1 power plus Smite. The final HQ choice in the Tyranid Codex is Old One-Eye. Another unique character that you can only have one of in your army, Old One-Eye is the named Carnifex. He works well both by himself and leading the charge of a horde of Carnifexes. He is toughness 7 and has 9 wounds. This means he can have character protection even though he's a monster, and you really want to use that to your fullest advantage. Thanks to the most recent FAQ, other Carnifexes can act as bodyguards for Old One-Eye. You cannot target him with ranged weapons if he has another Carnifex within 3 inches of him. This is even if he is the closest model or you have the sniper rule. These are all cool little buffs that help keep him alive until he can get in combat, which is absolutely where you need him to be. He doesn't have any guns, but is one of the other few monsters alongside Swarmlord who can actually do reasonable damage to large models like tanks. He has 5 attacks, which he can use his monstrous crushing claws with. These attacks come at strength 14, AP -3, and flat 3 damage. The offset of this is they are -1 to hit. But this is fine for Old One-Eye as he has the Alpha Leader ability, giving +1 to hit for all friendly Carnifex units within 6 inches, including himself. Combine this with the standard ability that all Carnifex get, giving them +1 to hit when they charge, and even with the -1 on your Crushing Claws, you are still hitting on 2s. The final ability solves Old One-Eye's only downside in that he only has 5 attacks. With the Berserk Rampage special rule, each hit roll of 6+ may immediately make another attack with the same weapon. Because he has an overall +1 to hit, this means he generates additional attacks on 5s, giving him an average of 7 attacks each time he fights. The best thing about him is fighting on death. Because he only has 9 wounds, he does not degrade. So even if he's killed, you just spend 2 command points and he can fight in death at full strength. He is very expensive at 220 points, and he only moves 7 inches a turn. But if you can keep him long enough to get into combat, he can do some real damage to your opponent. Our final HQ choice to discuss is not actually in the Tyranid Codex, as it is a Forge World model. The Malanthrope is a large monster that does the same thing Venomthropes in the Codex do. That is, if you have a friendly unit from the same Hive fleet within 3 inches, then that unit is -1 to hit for all ranged attacks. This is an amazing ability that really gives Tyranids a massive defensive buff. This, added to the fact that the Malanthrope has character protection and only 9 wounds, means that they have to kill all the stuff the Malanthrope is buffing before they can even target the Malanthrope. It is pretty expensive at 135 points, and it's difficult to get the model because it's Forge World. But this model is essential if you're wanting to play any massive horde of little bodies. It doesn't really do anything else other than its buff. It has only 4 attacks at strength 4 and hitting on 4s, so it's not going to do anything in combat, and it doesn't have any guns. And it only has a 5+ save and no invuln, so anything that ends up targeting it just has to get through its 9 wounds to kill it. It is very much a support piece. It does have Synapse, but it does not have any psychic powers. It does have a few more rare rules, but I'm not going to get into them because they very rarely come into play, and honestly, this entire model could be changed really soon, as Games Workshop is completely redoing all of the rules for Forge World models right now, so I just don't think it's really worth getting into rules that might not be in play in just a few months. Anyways, that wraps up all of the Tyranid HQ choices. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, that it give you some ideas for which units you want to have leading your swarm. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you all in the next video where I will go over each of the available troop units that Tyranids can take. Thanks for watching.